Okay, the last part of our naming will be about acids. Now, for something to be acidic, it actually has to be dissolved in water so that we can get hydrogen ions. So I want you to make sure you understand that. We'll talk more about that when we do solution chemistry. So in order for something to be acidic, it actually is dissolved in water. We're going to assume that the compounds that we are going to be seeing that begin with H will be dissolved in water. So acids always begin with hydrogen. They're going to be hydrogen and either some other element, or they're going to be hydrogen and a polyatomic ion. And we're going to assume that they're dissolved in water. Some exceptions to that are going to be water itself. Water itself is not an acid, and hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, is not an acid. So even though those two start with hydrogen, those two are not acids. Alright, so let us begin. So we're going to learn two types. The first one's called binary. I do have an example of one that's not binary here, but binary means it's pretty much made of hydrogen and some nonmetal. We're going to be looking at oxy acids or ternary acids next. So they're going to start with hydrogen and some sort of nonmetal. So you're going to use a prefix and a suffix. So if you don't see oxygen, oxygen is going to be the key guy in here. If you don't see oxygen but it starts with hydrogen, you're going to have a hydro and an ic ending. A hydro and an ic, and then it's going to have a second word of acid. For example, there is no oxygen in here. I know it's an acid because it begins with hydrogen, and we're going to assume that is something called AQ. I'm going to go ahead and introduce that. That stands for aqueous. Aqueous means it's dissolved in water. So we're going to assume that it's aqueous, dissolved in water. So this is an acid, and because there's no oxygen, I'm going to say hydro, and then I'm going to take part of bromine, and I'm going to take the brome part, kind of like I would say bromide, but instead of bromide, I'm going to say bromic. So hydrobromic acid. It has a prefix and a suffix, and then the word acid. Okay, so this is chlorine that has no oxygen in it. This is hydrochloric acid. That's your stomach acid. So those of you that have had anatomy, hydrochloric, HCl, is your stomach acid. So hydro, and then ic, then acid. Now, if you started looking at your polys, CN is cyanide. There's no oxygen in this, so this is hydrocyanic acid. And I'm getting that because that is cyanide, hydrocyanic acid. That one's kind of a weird one. Alright, so if I don't have an oxygen, I'm going to have hydro, ic, and acid. Now we have oxy acids. Oxy acids have oxygen. So it's going to have hydrogen, some other element, and oxygen. So that's what we're going to see. H, another element, and oxygen. And so really what they have is hydrogen and a polyatomic ion. And I've given you that list of polyatomics, and I'm pretty much going to stay true to that list. But there could be others. So if your polyatomic was an ATE, do you remember they were either ATE or ITEs, most of them? Okay, if it's an ATE poly and it's got a hydrogen in the beginning, we're going to change our ending from ate to ic, and we're going to put the word acid. There's no prefix, so hydro is not in this. Okay, so if we start recognizing NO3 is nitrate. NO3 is my favorite poly. It was the first poly I ever memorized when I was in college, which is why it's my favorite. So it has a -1 charge. So this is nitrate, but I've got hydrogen, so we're not going to call it hydrogen nitrate because we're going to assume that it's dissolved in water. And what this is known as is nitric acid. Nitric acid, not hydronitric acid. Hydro would be if there's no oxygen. Okay, so that's nitric acid. SO4 is sulfate, and so you would think that you would call it sulfic acid, but they thought that, I don't know, the IUPAC thought that sounds too weird. So for H2SO4, we actually say sulfuric acid. sulfuric acid. So we put the whole word sulfur in there, sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid is in your car batteries, that battery acid around inside your, in the acid inside your car battery. Alright, same thing going on here. Sulfur and phosphor are kind of weird. This is phosphate, and so they thought phosphoric acid sounds weird. So this is actually called phosphoric acid. So phosphoric acid. So notice they're all ic. They were originally an ATE polyatomic. Here's one. That's carbonate. So the fact that it has a hydrogen in it, this is called carbonic acid. Carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is what makes the carbonation in your sodas. Your dark sodas have both carbonic acid and phosphoric acid, which makes them more acidic than like your Sprites and stuff. Your Sprites and things just have carbonic acid in them. So these little numbers that you're seeing here, the 2, the 3, and the 2, has to do with the charge. So for instance, sulfate is SO4 with a 2- charge, and hydrogen is a +1. And remember, we take those numbers. So these are going to work just like ionic compounds, and so that's what you're seeing there. Phosphate is a 3, that's what we're seeing here, hydrogen a 1. Carbonate's a 2, hydrogen a 1. So that's where these numbers are coming from. Nitrate is a -1 and hydrogen's a +1. All right. So that's the ATE. I used to tell my high school students if they ate too much, they're going to get sick. 8-ic. And then you have your ITE polys, because remember there was nitrate, there was nitrite, there was sulfate, but there was also sulfite. Well, the ITE poly, if we get a hydrogen hanging out with it, it changes to OUS. So the 8s go to ic and the ites go to us. So this is actually known as nitrous acid. They're not as common as the ic acids. This would be sulfurous. My U looks weird. Oh, sorry about that. Sulfurous acid. Okay? So 8s to ic, ites to us. If it just has, here's one, HI. So you see how there's no oxygen in this one? These all have oxygen. If there's no oxygen, you say hydro. So this is hydro. That's iodine. So we start writing iodine, but then we change it to ic. So all those are ics. As hydroiodic acid just spells high. Pretty easy there. Okay, so that's really acids. And so you could say if there is no oxygen, if there is an oxygen, then you do not have hydro. So none of these had hydro to begin with because the O was present there. All right, that's acids.